Okay, good morning and welcome to the Nebraska Tech Workforce Dashboard walkthrough demo. Not sure what we called it in the description with Lightcast. I'm Shonna Dorsey with the Aksarben Foundation, and we're just excited to have this resource available thanks to some great partners, including Google and our executive committee with the Nebraska Tech Collaborative, and also super excited to partner with Lightcast on this effort. It's just very important to us that we have great data to make a better decision. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Courtney with Lightcast to get us started.
Thank you, Shonna, and thank you for the opportunity to meet with you this morning. We're very grateful for not only the partnership, but being able to speak to the dashboard. So, before we dive in the dashboard, I want to take a moment to introduce Lightcast and explain why this work matters. At Lightcast, our mission is to help organizations make better workforce decisions through trusted labor market intelligence. We bring together billions of data points on jobs, skills, employers, education, demographics, and workforce trends to help leaders understand what's happening in their labor market today and what's coming next. We work with economic development organizations, workforce boards, educational institutions, employers, and government agencies to answer critical questions such as what industries and occupations are growing, what skills are employers demanding, where are talent gaps emerging, and how can we better align education, workforce, and economic development strategies. What makes Lightcast unique is our ability to connect those pieces together through the language of skills. Rather than looking at jobs, education, and talent as separate conversations, we help communities understand how they intersect and what that means for future growth and competitiveness. The dashboard you're about to see is an example of how we turn complex labor market data into a practical, actionable resource. Rather than spending time gathering and interpreting data from multiple sources, leaders can quickly access the insights they need to support strategic planning, workforce development, business attraction, talent retention, and community decision making. So, with that, I'd like to turn it over to my colleague John, who will walk us through the dashboard and show how these insights can be put into action.
Yeah, thank you, Courtney. And my name's John Stevenson. I'm a solutions architect here at Lightcast, and I worked closely with Shauna and the team to build out this dashboard. Throughout the dashboard, we kind of have different tabs for different user bases and different reasons that you could need data. And so we have the region and demographics tab to explore population and demographics and things like that. The jobs and employers tab to understand hiring activity, who's hiring, and job opportunities across industries. Skills and education can be really useful for job seekers to see what skills are employers asking for, what kind of education are employers asking for. Sector demographics gets closely into some of the workforce related things within different tech occupations. What are the demographics? And then finally, the demand section gets into the supply and demand, looking at both profiles and postings to see which sectors are easier or harder to hire in. Within each of the tabs here at the top, you can filter by region, and so we've split the regions into the 6 Nebraska regions, and you can choose in this drop down here. And so the region and demographics here, you really get a broad look at what is the population, how has the population changed over the last 5 years, and then you also get a variety of charts as well. Really helpful for the audience that any of this data you can download into a CSV, or if you're presenting in a PowerPoint slide or anything like that, you can download the image so that it can quickly be placed into a PowerPoint for your resources. We get into some of the demographics just of the total population. And so, as Courtney mentioned, Lightcast is pulling this data from a variety of sources, including the Census Bureau and other things such as that. So this is looking at demographics of the total population and then kind of population by these age cohorts. Moving on to the jobs and employers tab. Similarly, you can filter by region, but then we also worked closely with Shonna to define a tech sector. And so here we have kind of a full tech sector and then broken out into these different subsectors. And so on page load, it loads as the tech sector, but we can choose the sector data and AI and see how has job change changed over the last 10 years. We can see it's grown 83%. What are the total count of jobs for this sector that we've defined? And then finally, you can choose individual occupations within the sector. Then we dive into some of the occupations, looking at things like number of jobs by occupation within this data and AI sector. What are these median earnings? The location quotient can be really useful for looking at your region to see how concentrated are these jobs within your region. And so data scientists within Nebraska are essentially 112%. If 100% is what we would expect for the region, it would be 12% over that. Finally, we get into a little bit more of the wage ranges. So if you're an employer looking at, if I want to hire a operations research analyst, I'm likely going to have to be paying them between this 25th percentile and this 75th percentile. And then Lightcast houses a database of online profiles pulling from things like LinkedIn, GitHub, and thousands of sources like that. And so within this data and AI sector, what are the profiles? Which companies do they have in their online profile? And so these are the top 15 companies for people that work in data and AI and have an online profile. And then also we can see within job postings for data and AI jobs, what are the top job titles? And so we can see things like data analyst, data scientist, all directly influenced by AI, and most AI related jobs don't have AI in the title, but are heavily influenced by AI. And so that's what these would be. And then moving along to the skills and education can be a really interesting piece if you're a job seeker. You can choose your region here. We'll choose the metro area. And we can see we've narrowed programs down to what we kind of deemed programs that feed into these tech occupations. And so you can see the different number of completions in 2024, as well as a little spark chart to see the trend. And then within these programs that we were saying lead into tech occupations, you can see the actual program descriptions as well. And then we get into the skills section, which is kind of Lightcast's bread and butter here, in that Lightcast polls has a huge job postings database, and we were able to dissect job postings and look at both, soft skills and hard skills as well. And so here you can choose your tech sector. We'll choose software engineering. If I'm a student or a job seeker within software engineering, then I can choose an occupation within software engineering. We'll choose web developers. And then finally, you get to see, within job postings, what are these top soft skills? Things like communication, troubleshooting, trustworthiness. And then top hard skills companies are looking for are more of these, technical skills, things like JavaScript, AI, CSS, things of that nature. And then the last kind of lever here that we can use when you choose let's look within all of the tech sector, you can filter by experience level as well. This can be really helpful for the employer if I'm looking, what skills do I need to be putting in my job posting? I'm hiring for a, entry level web developer or something of that nature, maybe a data scientist. You'll see that the skills differ quite a bit by experience level, and that can really affect um, what type of things employers are asking for. And then finally, we have the top certifications that other employers are asking for. So within the metro area and data scientists and at the kind of mid-tier experience level, we see that employers are asking for these different certifications. And then our sector demographics tab gets into the occupation level demographics. And so earlier, region and demographics showed for the full region, not only people working in the tech sector, but the full population. And so this section dives into demographics of the tech sector or of these different subsectors. And so you can choose your region, you can choose your subsector, and then you can see, kind of the age distribution of some of these sectors. A lot of these are kind of concentrated in that prime working age area, kind of that 25 to 55 range. We also look at occupation diversity by gender. And so we have both the, percentage by gender as well as the count by gender by occupation. And so if we narrow this down to the data and AI, we can see, data scientists are fairly well distributed, 54% male, 46% female. But if you get into software engineering, you'll see that, often a lot more male dominated. And then finally, the occupation and demographics kind of just shows for this sector what's the kind of ethnic or racial breakdown of the occupations. Finally, the demand piece can be really useful for both job seekers and employers or even policymakers. You can again filter by the region, the tech sector. We can see how job posting demand has changed over the last 5 years, as well as a kind of year over year trend. And so we can see 2026 is, marginally beneath 2025 or marginally above 2025. And then finally, kind of probably the most important piece of this page is kind of this profiles to postings ratio. We look at for the given selection, so in this case, the tech sector and your given region, how many online profiles does Lightcast have in their database that fit that criteria? And so in this case, there's about 36,000. How many postings for that same criteria are there? In this case, there's about 15,500. So then we take a ratio of that, and that makes it really helpful to be able to compare to other regions. And so you can see we have the postings to profile ratio for Nebraska in the tech sector, and we compare that to the US benchmark ratio. And above here, it has some ways that you can kind of interpret this data. And so a higher ratio, which in this case we have, means more demand than supply, which ultimately means for an employer, it's going to be harder to hire. But for a candidate, there may be more options for you. If it had a lower ratio, that would mean there would be more supply than demand, ultimately meaning it would be easier to hire as an employer because there's a a larger candidate pool. But if you were one of those candidates in the larger candidate pool, it would be harder to find a job. One thing I noticed while kind of working in this dashboard was a lot of the ratios are higher than the US national average, kind of around the metro area. If we move out west, a lot of them are lower, which would mean there's kind of a more supply than demand. But within the kind of western or eastern half of the state, there seem to be, generally speaking, um, more competition amongst employers. Finally, we go kind of back to the skills and we say within these hard skills that companies are asking for, how many of the candidates that we have within our profiles database have those skills listed in their profile? And so if I live in Nebraska and I work in data and AI, do I have data analysis in my profile? Do I have workflow management? Do I have SQL and other things like that? And so we can see the frequency in candidates would be 32%, while 43% of the postings ask for that skill. And so we can see there's a negative skill gap because more employers are asking for that skill than there are qualified candidates. This can be a really helpful tool if you're if you're educating folks, if you're within the universities, you can filter by skill gap and see, huge amounts of employers are asking for workflow management within data and AI, but not many candidates have that. And so if I'm a educator, I may look at this. We're trying to, focus on getting more folks into the data and AI space. Maybe this is something that we should be emphasizing within our courses or within our certifications. That is the dashboard. We'll make sure to share it out and would be really happy to kind of hear any questions that anyone has or any specific use cases that would be helpful to work through.
Thank you so much, John. And for folks on the call, as far as the update frequency, I know it depends on the data source, but can you talk a bit about that?
Yeah. Yeah, on page load, all of this data kind of pings back to the Lightcast side and is updated. And so job postings are updated kind of every other day, lagging a day. And so these are essentially job postings from about 2 days ago. They're being updated every single day, but lagging a day or so. And then a lot of the profiles database is also updated daily. A lot of the demographics related data is updated more on a yearly cadence or a quarterly cadence for occupation diversity. And then finally, the region demographics, this houses quite a bit of census level data from the BLS and things like that. So this is updated yearly or so. All of the data, Lightcast updates on our side, and so none of this data is on Shonna's team or anything like that to update. It's all updated automatically through our systems.
That's great. So it's like the latest data that you can pull for any of this, which is awesome. Good deal. Thanks for walking through that again. I always love to see it. And also for you to explain some of the bits and pieces. I appreciate that. Just looking at our participant list, if anyone has questions, feel free to drop them into the chat, or maybe there's a Q&A in here. Oh, hold on a second. There is. Okay. Yep, so you can drop them in the Q&A. Yeah, Daniel or John, anything else, or Courtney, anything else while we wait to see if there are questions?
I think John did a great job of walking through, but we're happy to answer questions and provide any additional insights that would be helpful for the attendees.
Okay. Okay, well, while we're waiting for questions, I can just ask a couple. But as you were looking at Nebraska's tech workforce data, and from the Lightcast perspective, what are some things that you notice or insights you have, given that you work with a lot of different communities across the country?
I think the major piece that stood out to me was within this demand section, just seeing I was really surprised by the higher ratio here, meaning there's a lot of demand for these tech sector jobs. Um, Especially when comparing to the US benchmark. You know, perceptions of Nebraska and things like that don't lead me to believe that. And so I was really surprised by that.
Mhm. What does that mean for like candidates specifically, employers as well?
Yeah, well, I think that what it means for candidates is that there's opportunities there, and it's and means start pursuing it now.
Mhm.
Ultimately, on the employer side, I think what it means that we need to be smart with our job postings. We need to, offer competitive salaries and competitive benefits and things of that nature, because ultimately, there's a big candidate pool and a smaller employer base.
Mhm. Yep, that's very true. And falls in line with a lot of what we're hearing from our from candidates, employer partners. They just have it depends on the skill set, as you know, but just there are more options, especially the more skilled you are. So where we're seeing some challenges in Nebraska is opportunities for more of that entry level individual. So unless you landed an internship and kind of can transition into a full-time job, it's a lot harder to come out of higher ed and then go right into full-time placement at this point, for a lot of different reasons. But this just seeing the top hard skills companies are looking for, I think that can hopefully give folks, especially early career individuals, some insights on what to focus on and what skills to like really boost in their experience.
And Shauna, I think that's a critical piece to focus on. We find oftentimes that regions just don't have the education provided for job seekers to know what's available. And a huge initiative is keeping talent in the region, right? We don't want them to leave. We want them to stay. We want them to know the opportunities that we have for them. Being able to tap into that, show them the skills that their ideal occupation and industry are asking for is an opportunity for them to realize that they have the credentials or certifications to pursue it, or if not, what are some of the upskilling opportunities available to them in region via those education partners for them to become eligible for their ideal occupation industry in this case tech. And so you guys are doing such a heavy lift of educating the region. And as we've mentioned several times, connecting those three critical audiences. What are the
Hmm.
skills that employers need? What are the skills that our talent have? And what are the skills available via the education partners? They're speaking the same language via skills. And I think that you guys are going to see some really great evolution from the education that you're providing.
Yeah, I love that. And then, one other piece too, and I know you mentioned regional retention. That's so critical because sometimes what you have happen is we've got people migrating out of Nebraska every year. They say around 4,000 with, bachelor's degree and above. But what you also have happening is people leaving our smaller communities to move to like in Omaha, Lincoln, Kearney, Norfolk. And we also want to not prevent that. Some of that's just going to happen, but the more we can do to show folks that there are opportunities within each region in Nebraska, the better. Like that's how we grow the state. So yeah. So the regional breakdown is so helpful here because folks can see in Mid Plains, what are the things that I need to be focused on for employers within this area?
Yeah, we hope that your regional partners feel represented. We know
Mhm.
that there is a difference between the different regions within a state, and they need to be seen. And so that region filter hopefully brings that recognition and the differences between the regions within Nebraska.
Yeah. That's great. And so then if I'm a candidate, I'm just kind of workshopping this in my head. So I'm a candidate, I come out here and I'm like, great, I know for a 1 to 3 year professional, I need to focus on insert skills. If I want to know which employers are hiring for that type of position, yes, awesome. So we'll go to jobs and employers. And then if I were looking for specific job postings, is there a Lightcast source for that, or is that LinkedIn, or what's the source for the positions?
Yeah, yeah. So job postings are kind of sourced from, Courtney can correct me, thousands, hundreds of thousands of sites, and so
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah.
like it has to aggregates from LinkedIn, from direct sources, and so a lot of our sources are directly from employers, usgov.com, things like that, and so we aggregate all of those, we deduplicate those because, as you know, a lot of companies post job postings on 5, 10, 15 different websites, and so we take all of those, we deduplicate those, and then we can kind of get a true sense of what kind of job postings people are asking for.
Okay. And then if I were a candidate, what would be my next step? So I'm like, great. I know, for example, Fiserv, they hire a lot of people who are in the sector or, job title I'm interested in. What would you say they should do next?
Yeah, well, I think the knowledge of knowing, okay, these are the companies that are hiring these type of people, and then these are the type of skills that are needed for these type of jobs. You can kind of connect and then be much more pointed in
Hmm.
your targeted outlook of how we're interacting with these companies. And so without any sort of data or knowledge of these companies, you may be able to shoot in the dark to them, and you may be able to email them, and you might get lucky. But I think you have a much higher shot at, once you know the skills that they're asking for, and then even within the demand section here, we can see what skills do the other candidates not have. And so maybe I should be getting these skills, and then that's a skill I can highlight to different employers and really be able to stand out.
Mm-hmm. That's great advice. And I'm thinking too, as in our role here at the NTC, we do a lot of like panels and employer classroom visits and things like that. And so as I'm thinking about which companies to target, I probably would go after the ones that have like a larger posting frequency, only because I know that most likely they'll have an established internship program in some cases. They're just bigger and just more, have a little bit more capacity to offer those sorts of things. So that just gives us some great insights to think about who to target, how to make sure our students are best positioned for that next opportunity or first opportunity in some cases. So very useful on many different fronts.
Yeah, John, I'll piggyback on your response to Shauna's question. I think that it's kind of giving you the answer to the test, right? So if I'm a job seeker, I'm going to target these companies that are hiring. I know what they're looking for. So in my resume, in my response to them, I'm probably going to really highlight those particular skills that they are asking for. I don't know how highlighted or relevant those are when a job seeker is looking at the job postings. They may be hidden in a lot of different language, but here it is in plain sight what they're looking for. Let's leverage that and say, I have this skill, or I'm pursuing it, or I know what you need and I can bring that to the table. I think that this gives the job seekers a huge advantage in being able to speak the language that the particular employer is asking for.
Hmm. Fully agree. And I know too, some of our higher ed partners, they're doing the great and very challenging work of trying to figure out employer demand. It just changes depending on the year, and it has shifted significantly in the last 2 to 3 years, I would say. So one thing that this does is, instead of us having to survey employers, like Courtney, you mentioned this early in the call, but probably you too, John, but instead of sending out a survey saying, hey, what do you need? This says this is what the data is showing us based on jobs posted, hiring trends. This is the data. And then we can take that as employers, partners like us, and say, how can we collaborate to help bridge the gap? So I think it just takes out the very tedious um, step of surveying and allows us to focus on the outcomes we're after, which is bridging these skills gaps.
That education
Something
piece.
that
Oh, forgive me. Go ahead, Daniel.
No, I was just going to say, kind of piggybacking off of what you're saying with the educators, something I like to focus on, and I really like, John, how you added it in the skills tab there, is actually the latest 90-day percent change of these hard skills, where we can kind of look at the last 90 days and some of these skills that may have been posted less often are still showing 30% change over the last 90 days. And so that exponential growth in just a skill can kind of tell us that it's going to just continue to grow in the future, and that could be a good focus point for the educators, but also the job seekers as well.
Hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And I know many of our higher ed partners have AI related training right now, but we've got one in the state, UNO, they're offering micro credentials in intelligence. And so when we're thinking about just even upskilling and seeing that there's such a huge need for that skill, this just gives us true data that says right now we see that there's a gap here. UNO has a solution that you can go take advantage of today. So it just, I think, really helps shortcut that gap between what the need is versus what we can do about it.
Absolutely.
Courtney, I'm
And
sorry, I interrupted
no,
you.
no, it actually Daniel kind of was a great intro to what I was going for. So thanks, Daniel. So often we find that regions are focused on the current demand, what do we need now? And there is potential for lacking a future ready workforce.
Hmm.
And tying in that education piece, helping see, as Daniel mentioned, the trends. Where are we trending? What does that look like going forward so that we're not only prepared to fill the demand now, but our education partners can help us fill and be prepared for the demand in the future. And that's so incredibly important for our priority sectors, making sure that they're supported from a present and future standpoint. And so agree with Daniel that education piece, understanding those trends is going to be really valuable for those educational conversations.
Hmm. Agreed. There's so much here. And it's fun for me to think about how we leverage it. Like just even as you scroll down to the certification section. Yeah. Yep, and sort. So I see a lot of secret clearance, like probably, tied to our cybersecurity work. And then, we've got a great partner in Offutt Air Force Base and some separating service folks who might have a security clearance that could transition into these private sector jobs. So just thinking about like where might the pool of candidates be too. So there's I think a lot of interesting things that you can do with this data as you explore and think about how to solve some of these skills gaps that we have here in the state. So I love it. I love data, by the way. It's fun for me.
Us too. So we're happy to, nerd out on the data points, Shauna.
Yeah, love it. Well, I'm not seeing any questions, but any final insights or thoughts you guys have for folks?
I think something to consider is that this is something that evolves over time. So at Lightcast, we really prioritize understanding what the story needs to be now, but then staying really close aligned with Shauna's team to make sure that the story is continuing to be relevant. And so, as the Nebraska Tech workforce evolves, as the perspective that you want to be educating evolves, the dashboard will as well. And that's something we take a lot of pride in. And we're just grateful for the start of this. We're hopeful that the metrics bring value to the partners that are going to be using it. We're open to feedback and questions and involvement. So we're excited to see how this progresses over the next year. And again, Shauna, we're just very grateful for this opportunity. So thank you for including this in the work that you guys are doing.
Absolutely. It's critical and we appreciate you guys. All right. Well, thank you so much. And as Courtney mentioned, if you have questions, let us know. I believe at the bottom of that dashboard page, there's a link to a form. If not, I'll send it to John so we can get it added, but I'll shoot it over to you. But yeah, just thanks again to the state for engaging in this work with us. And yeah, it takes all of us, as everybody knows. I always say that, but it truly does. So thanks again. You guys have a great day. Chat
Thank
later.
you.
Mhm. Bye.